How's it going, everybody? Today we're going to do a quick tutorial. I'm going to show you how to make this. I know it's kind of crazy, it looks really intense. So we're going to build this entire surreal environment, and I'm going to walk you guys through it with really simple steps, and at the end this is what you're going to end up with. Alright, let's get into it. Okay, so first thing you want to do is open up a new document. We're going to make this one 10 inches wide by 7.5 inches tall. Resolution should be 300, RGB and 8-bit is fine. Click create. So now we have our canvas, and the first thing we're going to do is build that background. So we're going to drag in the ocean 1 JPEG, drop that in there, hit enter. You'll notice that it is a smart object because we dragged it in. Just make sure that this little icon in the bottom right hand corner is there so that this is a smart object. It's really important that we work with smart objects in this tutorial. So the first thing we're going to do is warp this flat ocean into that curved, crazy water that you saw earlier. So we're going to go to Filter, Distort, and click Polar Coordinates. So as you can see, it's going to warp the image like this. It's going to wrap it around a center point. Make sure that you're clicked on Rectangular to Polar and hit OK. And there you go. This is the beginning of that tunnel-like ocean that we're going to be creating. Now we want to convert this layer into a smart object. Again, it already is a smart object, but once we right click and convert to smart object, all the effects, the smart filters will be applied to this. They're still applied to that layer, but they can't be affected anymore unless we double click to open it up. It opens in a new Photoshop document, and you have your polar coordinates filter right there. So I don't need to open this, I don't need to save this, so I'm going to go back. But what you should have now is a smart object with no smart filters because we created it as another smart object, and your scene should look like this. The reason we're doing that is because we're going to be applying more smart filters, but they have to affect the previous smart filter. It's a little bit confusing and we're getting into some deep layers here, but all you have to do is make sure that you convert that into a smart object again. So do the polar coordinates. Once it's applied, right click, convert to smart object, and then you'll end up like this. Next up, we're going to apply a pinch distortion filter. So we're going to go filter, distort, pinch, and we will set the amount to 100%. And what this is going to do is pull everything towards the center point in the middle, and that kind of elongates this tube-like ocean that we're creating here. So you can see it without the pinch filter and with the pinch filter. It just pulls everything back and it makes this hole a bit smaller in the background. Now once again, we're going to convert this smart object into a smart object. We're going to do that, and all these filters will be applied, and they can no longer be changed unless it's opened. Now we're going to fix this seam that we have in the middle. We're going to do that by duplicating. So I'm going to click on this layer and hit Command J. That will duplicate the layer. And now we're going to flip this top layer vertically so that we get a nice body of water up here and the seam is down there. And we will apply a mask to that layer, and I'm going to fill that mask with black so it's hiding this layer completely. And now I'll take a nice big soft brush, and we can, with a white brush, paint over the seam. Oop, I need some softer edges on that brush so it blends in better. If I paint on the seam, you'll see that I can just blend these two images together and get rid of that. It's looking pretty good. So now we have it completely blended with no seam. I'm just gonna touch up this part in here. There you go. No seams, it looks really good. So we're gonna group those together and we're gonna treat this as one layer now. You can call that ocean tunnel. And now I'm going to duplicate the group by hitting Command J on my keyboard. And I will turn this bottom layer into a smart object. So now you can't alter that group anymore. It's one smart object. And now we're going to fill in these corners with some more of the ocean. So it all blends and the entire image is blue water. So I'm going to apply that pinch filter again the same way as I did before. So I can just click filter, pinch should be here at the top because that was the last filter you used. If it's not, just go back down to distort, pinch, click OK. When it's 100%, and if I hide this layer on top, you can see what we did to that bottom layer. There's that pinch effect. So it really, really warps everything into the distance, kind of. And the reason we want to do that is because we need this darker area around the edge. And I'm going to just extend this just beyond the corners of the white, so we fill the entire image. I will click OK. Now the smart filter is still applied, and we can turn this group back on. So now you can see that we have some dark water here matching this water. It's all pretty similar, but we have this edge that is really visible, so we need to get rid of that edge now. To do that, I'm just going to add a mask to this group by clicking the mask icon down here, and with a black brush, just a small to medium sized brush, I will paint away the edges. And make the brush a bit bigger and just kind of click around the edges to blend things in a bit more. That's looking pretty good. Okay, so you should end up with something that looks like this. We have our background and we have our main tunnel there, and everything is looking pretty nice now. Now I'm going to convert this bottom layer into a smart object so that the pinch filter can't be changed anymore either. So now we have a smart object, our group on top with a mask, and this white background. Last thing I will do to make this scene look a little bit better is create a vignette, and that's just a black fade around the edges of the canvas. So to do that, I'll create a new layer. I'll fill it with black and add a mask. And now I'm just going to make a really large brush, and with the mask selected, just clicking in the middle a few times until we get something like that. So now we have our vignette, and actually that's a bit too wide. I kind of want to bring it back in, so I'm going to do that again, and just with a large brush, just clicking a couple times. There we go. So we get this nice dark fade into into that dark water on the edges. And now we almost have a light source coming from way down here, and it fades to black back here. I might bring down the opacity of this a little bit, maybe 80 or 90%, something like that. This all depends on how dark you actually painted the vignette in the first place. So there you go, we have our ocean, we have this tube-like surreal environment that we could place our items in now. We're going to next add the girl standing on the board here, and the ships and the kraken or octopus coming out of the water. So make sure to save your document. I'm just going to save this one now. I'm going to call it final. You guys can name your assignment according to the PDF attached. I'll save this to my desktop just for now. So I have it. You definitely don't want to lose your progress. Always be saving your work as you go along. And keep your layers named. So I'm going to name this vignette. Ocean tunnel copy, that's fine. Ocean tunnel and background. This is good for now. I'll hit save again. And that's it for step 1, creating the ocean. Now we're going to add the girl standing on the plank or walking the plank. So the first thing that we're going to bring in is the wood.jpg. Just drop that in, hit enter, and make sure it's a smart object. Look for that little icon in the bottom right hand corner of this thumbnail. I'm going to rotate it by holding shift. I'll snap to these angles, and we could bring it to 90 degrees, so it's straight up, and just hit the check mark. Now I'm going to squish this board a little bit, because we don't need it to be this long, and I will now change the perspective of the board. So I want it to look like it's sticking out into the scene, kind of like popping out towards this circle, but we need to follow the depth of this image. So it will be wider in the foreground and narrower as it goes away from us. So just placing the board somewhere in the middle of the image at about this size, then I can hit edit, transform, perspective, and I'll bring in the front and bring out the back. Just kind of keep doing that until it looks right about there. And I'm going to bring it down so it's not sticking out so far. So we end up with something that looks like this. This is our plank that the girl will walk out onto. I might even bring it in a bit. Looks a little bit big. So something like that should be fine. We can always change it afterwards because it is a smart object. We can alter that perspective. If you had done this with a rasterized layer, you can't change the perspective again based on your previous changes, so it's best to use a smart object when you're doing distortions like that. Now we're going to drag in the girl. So we're just going to drag this girl.jpg layer into the composition. It's a pretty big image that fills the whole space. Make sure that it's a smart object. Now we're going to use the pen tool or any method that we learned in class to cut out the model. So I'm just going to quickly trace it around here. There's a lot of detail, so take your time on this. Okay, so now I have my entire girl or woman outline here. I'm going to save this path by double clicking on it in my working paths folder here, and I'll name it woman outline. Hit OK, and now I have to fill in the little holes that we have here in between some of the material of the dress. So I'm going to click off of this outline and start a new path, a separate path, to cut out all the holes. Okay, so as you guys can see, I cut out all the holes. There was one between her thumb and fingers here, between her dress and her arm here, and then another one between this piece of material and her dress. And I just named it holes, so I have one outline around the edge of the woman and one for all the spaces where the outline didn't cover, okay? So with the outline selected, I will convert it to the selection, and now clicked on the girl layer, I will create a new mask and it will mask out all the outside of that selection. Now all I have to do is get rid of the holes like in here and here and there, and to do that I'll just select the holes outline, do the same thing, click the selection tool, except this time I will click on my mask, and with black selected I will fill those holes with black, and now you can see the water in the background. Okay, so that's looking pretty good so far. I'm just going to adjust the size of her and make her a little bit smaller and put her on the end of that plank as if she's kind of walking the plank. So I'm going to scale her accordingly, something about there, and just place her more closer to the edge of that board, maybe a little bit bigger, something like that. Okay, so she's definitely like right on the edge of that plank. Put her up here a little bit more, and I'm just gonna bring everything down. So I'll hit OK, select her and the wood, bring everything down a bit so it's not sticking out so far, and I like that. Oops, that looks pretty good. Basically want her waist to be around the center of the composition, because that camera angle at which this photo was taken, the camera was on about this plane, and our ocean scene is completely symmetrical, so it's right in the middle is the horizon line basically. So we're looking for that horizon line in the photo so that it looks as if she's actually standing in the scene. So that looks pretty good right there. I do want to make a little change to the wood, which we can because it's a smart object. So I'm going to go to Edit, Transform, Perspective again, and just widen out the base of that. Okay. She's standing on the edge of this plank, and now we can go and fix the end of her dress. So, oops. As you can see, the photo was cropped right at the bottom of her dress. So we're missing that little bit there. That's no problem. We can fill that in with the clone tool. So to do that, I'm just going to create a new layer and call it Fix Dress. And I will use the pen tool to draw a path where I think that dress would have gone. Okay, so now we have our path. Oops. Now we have our path, and in our paths window, I'm just going to convert that to a selection, and now fill this in with, actually I won't fill that in with black, I will paint into it with the clone tool. So using the clone tool, I'll click on the girl layer, hold down Option on the keyboard, And now I can grab some of her dress from an area like up here, and we could add it back in to this space down here. If I click on the fixed dress layer, that's where I will paint it back in, and we're just going to roughly fill in that shape. I'll do that again, get some of this darker dress from the girl layer and fill it in down here. Okay, do that one more time and fill it in down here. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Now we can just add some with that selection. I lost my selection there, but that's okay. I'll just go into my paths, find it there, select it again, and click back on my fixed dress layer. Now I just want to paint in some black on top of that, just to even things out. So I'm just going to take a paintbrush here and just paint around the edges. So it kind of fades in to the rest of the dress and looks a bit more realistic. I have a little bit of a mistake here, so I'm just going to fix that. I'm just going to blur that out and it'll blend in together. Okay, so now we have the bottom of her dress. She's standing on the end of this plank. Everything looks good. She's cut out. We've got all the little details around the dress. It looks really good right now. Now I want to group the two layers that I made to create the girl and her dress. So I'm just going to group those together just by hitting Command G on the keyboard. That creates a group. I can call this woman, and I will right click that group and convert to smart object. So now it's just a smart object, and we can apply a smart filter to it. We're going to add a blur, a Gaussian blur of about 1.5 and hit OK. Now you might be thinking, why would we blur the entire girl? That doesn't look right. We're not going to leave it like this. We're going to use this Gaussian blur and only have it on our edge of our woman so that she just sits in the scene a bit better and she doesn't look like a cardboard cutout. The edges of the cut will be a little bit blurred, and that will hide the fact that we cut her out. To do this, we will select the entire outer edge of the woman by holding down Command on the keyboard and clicking at the same time on this thumbnail, and that selects her outline. Now we can click into the smart filter here. So now we're selected on the mask applied to any smart filters on this layer, and we will go to select, modify, contract, and we can contract it by 3 pixels and then hit OK. So now you can see it's just within her outline. Now I'm just going to fill this mask with a black so it hides that Gaussian blur from everywhere except just the edge of her. And there you go. She's blended into the scene a little bit better. Looks a little bit more realistic around the edges. And if I turn this on and off, you can see how that just helps her blend into the background a bit better. So she's in the scene. Okay, I'm going to save. And last but not least, the final step here with the woman is we will convert this smart object layer into a smart object again, so that the outer edge blur is applied and can't be altered anymore. So now we have just smart object, no smart layers showing here. We have our woman standing on the plank with a vignette and the ocean in the background. Now that's the end of step 2. We're going to move on to step 3. We're going to add the ships and the octopus or kraken into the water and create some interest in this scene and add some action to it. Okay, so to add those ships and the octopus, the first thing we'll do is drag them in. I have 2 different cutout ships for you guys to choose from. I'm just going to drag ship1.png into this document, hit OK. or hit enter. Now the ship is a smart object because we dragged it in. Double check that you have that smart object icon in the bottom corner there. If not, right click and convert to smart object. Now I'm just going to scale this down a bit and rotate it like this. Scale it down a bit more. And we're going to place it in the water somewhere over here. This is up to you, just really wherever you think the ships fit nicely into the composition. I thought it looked kind of cool, kind of riding this ocean up and around. So I'm going to place it just about there. Maybe angle it a bit. Okay, so that looks good. I'm happy with that. I want to now make it look like this is in the water, so I have to hide some of the hull of the boat. I'll just add a layer mask, and we'll use some black on that layer mask to hide some of the ship. Maybe a smaller brush. And just trying to follow the curve of the wave here to hide that bottom of the boat. That's looking pretty good. Maybe a little too much. Okay, and now I'm going to add a new layer on top and call this layer Ship 1 Water Splash. I want to add some waves splashing up against the hull of the boat as it travels through the water. To do that, it's just going to be really simple. This is in the background, so it doesn't need to be very detailed. I'm just going to use a brush, some kind of textured brush, and even something like the basic bristle brush that comes with Photoshop. We can add our little wave splashes. So you get a brush like that. I'm going to change it to white and make it quite a bit smaller and bring the opacity down to about 50. That's even a little bit too big. It needs to be smaller. I think I'll actually try a different brush. This one isn't really working for me. How about that one's too solid. This one, perfect. Okay. So this would be a good brush. Just lightly adding some white little stamps of paint there, and from a distance this will look like simple water splashing up against the boat. So I'll zoom out. Now you can see that it's really small in the distance, so it doesn't have to be very detailed, but it looks a lot better and it adds that level of detail that puts the ship into the water rather than just sticking it on top. So now I'm going to do the same for the second ship. I'll just get ship2.png, drag it in, scale it accordingly. I want this one to be even further in the background, so I'm going to make it really small. And we're going to put it over here, trying to add some balance. Okay, so we're just going to put this one up. It's going to be a little bit higher on the curve of the ocean here. And I'm just going to put it somewhere right there. That looks pretty good. It's pretty cool. It's kind of going upside down. It's a little bit crazy. Alright. Okay. It's looking pretty good. So now we have 2 ships in the water. I'm going to do the same thing to ship 2 as I did to ship 1. So we have our water layer for ship 1. So I'll just call that ship 1 water splash. And for ship 2, I'll add a new layer, call it ship 2 water splash. Okay, and we're going to paint the same water technique. Some little dabs of white paint, basically. Very, very small. It's so far in the distance that it's going to be really hard to notice this. Okay, that should be good, and zoom out. Okay, it's looking pretty good so far. We have our ships, we have our woman, and she's walking the plank into this crazy looking surreal ocean. I'm going to save. Next up will be to add in the tentacles or kraken sticking out of the water in different parts around these ships. So to do that, we're going to drag in the octopus.jpg image included in the images folder. Hit enter. So now we have our smart object here, and the first thing we will do is select the dark space with just the magic wand selection tool and select all the dark spaces between the tentacles. So get all the holes, fill those in. I'm just using holding down shift will let you add more selections to your main selection. Okay, there's a hole there, and that looks pretty good. Now, we're only going to use a couple of these tentacles. It just depends on the lighting. So don't worry about the selection being too perfect around here. We're not even going to use this part, so don't worry about it so much. Now that I have the outside selected, I want to invert that selection so just the octopus is selected. So I will, with the selection tool, right click and select inverse. So now I have the inverse of that selection, and I will create a mask by clicking the mask icon in the layers panel. So now that octopus is masked out completely. Now convert this octopus layer into a smart object so that that layer mask cannot be changed anymore unless that smart object is opened. And duplicate this, Command J, so we have 2. And I'm just going to turn off the original, and we're going to use this octopus copy as our first tentacle. So what we will do is create a mask on that layer, and we're going to look for our tentacle, the first one that we want to use, that has some good lighting and that we could add into the scene. So I like this one right here. I think that one's a pretty good one. So I'm just going to select around it loosely with the lasso tool, just drawing and selecting the area that I want to keep. And I'll select inverse so that everything else is selected. With that mask clicked, I'll fill that with black, and we're left with just that tentacle showing. And that's all we need. Oop, I got a little bit left over outside of the scene. So I'm just going to fill that with black with a paintbrush. Go back to a soft brush and make that bigger and just fill that in. Oops, painting on the wrong layer. Oop. Opacity 50%. There you go. Okay, so now we have our octopus layer, and we're going to use this tentacle, and we're going to place it in the scene. I'm going to put it right near one of these ships. So, excuse me. I'm going to put it right near one of these ships so that it looks like it's about to attack one of them. And always consider the lighting. So when choosing these different items to add to your scene, you always have to consider the lighting. So we will be changing the lighting slightly to make the woman and the ships fit into the scene better. These octopus tentacles have a very harsh shadow on them and a clear light source. So we want to reflect that this is where the light is coming from, the circle, and it's hitting the octopus in this way. So I wouldn't want to, say for instance, I would not want to have this going in that direction because that doesn't make any sense. The light source is not over here, it's dark over here. So we want to kind of fit things into the scene according to their light source and match all these different layers together just to make it look a bit more realistic in the end. I'll make this a bit smaller. Okay, so just gonna rotate that, and something like this looks pretty good. It's about to attack this little ship here. And now I'm going to do the same thing as I did to the ships to make them look like they're in the water. That being mask out the bottom along the curvature of the water so it looks like it's popping out. And we can create a new layer and call this Tentacle 2 because it's near ship number 2, and water splash. Okay, we'll now use the same technique with this round spiky brush here, and on a new layer with a white brush, just paint in a few splashes of water. And I'm just going to turn the opacity of that layer down a bit so it blends into the scene. And when we zoom out, that's looking pretty good. We have our tentacle, it's going to attack the ship. Now let's add in a few more. Now to make more tentacles, we're just going to use this octopus layer as our base, and we're going to duplicate it a couple more times. 1, 2, 3 more times. I'll shut off the original and the other 2, and I'll use this one, and I'll do that same technique where I'll choose a tentacle and I'll cut it out, and we'll use that one. And I'll just keep repeating this process until I have the tentacles around the scene. Okay, so for this one, I think I'll use this one right here. Grab that lasso tool, draw around that tentacle, like that, and create a mask. So I masked out everything except that tentacle. And now I'm just going to shrink that down and place it within the scene. Again, considering that light source, I want it to match where the light is coming from. So I'm just going to put this really small, kind of in the background. This will be far away. Really far away, this one. Maybe like that. And in the water, something like that. And now I'm just going to zoom in and use a regular soft brush and mask away the bottom so it looks like it's sticking out of the water again. Add some of that water. It's looking pretty good. I think I'm going to change the scale of the ship here. Ship 1 along with the water splash. I'm just going to make that a little bit bigger and change its position slightly. So maybe a little bit smaller, something like that. That looks a bit better. Now I will add one more tentacle into the water. So I'll just turn on another one of these octopus layers. Let's find another good one to work with. I think this one could work. So we're just going to cut that one out right here. Just loosely tracing the outer edge and apply a mask. So now we end up with this, and all we have to do is scale that down a little bit. And we're going to make this one actually wrap around behind this ship, kind of as if it's just about to take this ship down underwater. Maybe something like this. Kind of dip that in behind. Something like that. I'm going to put this one behind ship 1 and adjust ship 1. That actually looks pretty good. I like the way it's sticking out there. Now I just need to mask it into the water around this area. And this one. Okay, so now we have our 3 tentacles in the water attacking these ships, and I want to add one more large one right here up in the foreground as if it's about to swipe away this woman standing on this board. And to do that, I'll turn on my last octopus copy that I made. Actually, maybe I'll just delete that one and use a different one, one of the ones I already cut out just to save myself some time. I'll use the one that I just created right here. I'll duplicate that and bring it up above everything all the way to the front, and we'll scale that. Scale that to be really big, and actually flip this horizontally. And there it is. A little bit bigger. So now it looks like it's about to kind of swipe away this poor woman here standing on the edge of that board. Okay, so there you go. And because it's a smart object, it remained pretty clear and it didn't get too blurry when we blew it up very large. However, this is really close, and I imagine this to be moving. So now what we could do is add a little bit of motion blur to this tentacle here, so to make it look like it's about to swipe down. To do that, I will just click Filter, Blur, and we'll go up to Motion Blur. And I'll use a motion blur with an angle of about 70. This angle kind of follows the angle of this tentacle, so it makes it look like it's moving. And a distance of about 50 seems to work well here. You can change this according to how fast you want that tentacle to look like it's moving, but something around 50 or 60 looks pretty good. Maybe even 60, 58, that'll work. Hit OK. So now we have this motion coming in where this tentacle is about to swipe down and maybe crush the ship that she's standing on, or whatever it is that she's standing on here, this plank, right? And that's basically our scene. So now we have ship 1, tentacle 1, ship 2, tentacle 2, tentacle 3, and this 4th tentacle here up in the foreground. We added our water splashes around the base of all these elements where they're coming out of the water to make it look like they are actually in the scene. I'm going to add some water splash to this final one, because I haven't added any yet. I'll create a new layer and call this tentacle 4, or sorry, which one is that? This is tentacle 1, water splash. And just grab that brush and make it a lot smaller. And just kind of make some light I'll change the opacity down to something much lower. And make it a little bit smaller. Okay, that's looking pretty good now. And now that we have all these elements created, we need to organize them. Because right now, this is a little bit unorganized. And I'm going to further name my layers. So we'll call this one, just double clicking and calling that foreground tentacle. Okay, so now we have the foreground tentacle on its own. This goes with tentacle 1, so I'm going to drag that down here. So this one and this one are together, and I'm just going to group those and call that tentacle 1. And we have ship 1 with the ship 1 water splash. I'll group those and call those ship 1. And I will group these two groups together to create one group with ship 1 and tentacle 1. And I will call that ship 1, tentacle 1. And I'll repeat this for all the other elements here in the layers panel. Okay, so now we have our tentacle 3 with the water grouped, our foreground tentacle, ship 2 and tentacle 2 together, and ship 1 and tentacle 1 together. And I want to group all of this into one group and call that action. So now we're nice and organized. And now I'm just going to reorder these in the order that they appear, putting 1 and 2, 3, and the foreground at the bottom here. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Now we have all our elements in the scene. We have a little blur effect applied here, and we added our little water effect to blend things into the ocean. It's looking really great, and we're about to get to the next step, which is lighting and shadows. So we can bring all of these elements together and then we'll also color them so that they match the scene and everything looks like it's in the same environment. So the first thing we want to do is darken the scene a little bit. We will add a levels adjustment layer above our ocean background element in the layers panel. So right above these ocean elements, I want to add an adjustment layer for levels. Okay, so I'm going to drag this arrow on the right towards the left until the value here is 195. And you can see that that immediately darkens the image a little bit. It's darkening everything below it, so just the ocean is being affected by this levels adjustment. Everything else is staying bright. We will now add more contrast to the overall image. So this vignette layer should actually be all the way at the very top above everything, so that that vignette is cast on the entire image. Just below the vignette, we want to add our levels adjustment layer again, and this time I'm going to change this white value here to 230, and in the values right beneath the graph here, I want to change the black value to 15, darkening the image a bit further, and we're going to bump up some of the lights and change this to 230. And now we have a little bit more contrast in this image. The colors are a bit richer, the darks are darker, and the lights are a bit lighter. And that is affecting all layers beneath it. So this should be above everything except for the vignette. Next, we will add a photo filter adjustment layer to warm up the overall image. Add this photo filter adjustment layer just below the second levels adjustment layer we created. So right here, I'm going to click and add the photo filter. And we're going to warm things up a little bit because it's a bit too blue. So choose filter right here, not color, we want to choose filter. And then in the drop down menu, we're going to choose warming filter 85. And we will set that to a value of about 40%. So we're getting this dark, slightly warmer image. And if I turn that on and off, you can see the difference it makes. And it's affecting all layers beneath it. So right now we're trying to color everything so it matches the environment and everything matches. So we want everything to have the same kind of tone to it. And that'll just create a uniform light and color in our entire piece. We will now add a series of adjustment layers to our woman layer so that she has a uniform lighting and color consistent with the environment. So just above this layer, we're going to add a few adjustment layers. The first one we're going to add is a photo filter. So adjustment layer, photo filter. This time I'm going to choose the color option, and just double clicking this color box, I can now enter any color value I want to tint the image. I'm going to enter in 0079AB, and that will give me a blue color because we're going to cool down the warm tones on the image of the woman. And now we just want to change the density all the way up to 100%. Now you can see that that affected the entire image. That's not what we want. We just want it to affect the woman standing here. So to do that, I will right click on this layer and create a clipping mask so that it's only affecting the layer immediately below it, which is the woman layer. When applying these photo filters, always make sure that preserve luminosity is checked, and that will just allow the natural light of the photo to shine through that color. With this photo filter clicked, I'm going to create a new adjustment layer for brightness and contrast. I want the brightness to go all the way down to negative 150 because we're really going to darken her as she's more in the foreground and there's not a light source behind her. And once that's done, I just want to create a clipping mask again so it only affects the woman standing here. So you can see what that did by clicking on and off. Next, I'll add another brightness and contrast adjustment layer just on top. This time I'll drag the brightness down to about -35 because we need to darken that image further. And I will do the same thing, creating a clipping mask so it only affects the woman. Now I will add a photo filter adjustment layer just above that, and this time I will choose a filter and a cooling filter. We'll go with cooling filter 82, and I'll change the value to 32%. Okay, and again, convert that to a clipping mask so it's only affecting the woman. So now she's looking a lot darker and more of a blue tone, reflecting the color of the water around her. That's it for the woman for now, so we're just going to leave this as is, and now we're going to change some of the color of the tentacles. The color of the tentacles right now is really saturated and the shadows are really dark and the lights are really light. Now I want to change that, but I want to change that to all the tentacles in the scene, not just one at a time. Because these are all smart objects based off of the same source, we can simply click our original octopus layer here that has been turned off, or we can open up any one of the tentacles that we have created. As long as it's a smart object, double click that smart object and it will open up the octopus layer that is cut out. Now, any changes that we make here will affect all the layers in your composition containing the octopus layer. The first thing I'm going to do is click on this layer mask for the octopus and add a Gaussian blur of about 0.9 just to give this image a slight blur around the edges, just like we did before with the woman. So now the edges are a little bit blurred, it'll just blend into the scene a little bit better. Now clicking on the thumbnail for that layer itself, I will choose Filter, Gaussian Blur, and this time I'll do a value of 1.5 and click OK. So now we actually blurred the entire octopus just a bit, and the reason for that is it'll just help it blend into the scene a little bit better. It's a lot sharper of an image compared to the woman, and the tentacles are farther away in the distance in our piece, so they should be a little bit blurred out. Next, let's add a hue/saturation adjustment layer just above the octopus layer. Hue, saturation, and we will drag the saturation value down to about -60. We want to really desaturate this. We don't want it to look like such a bright, punchy color. It's going to be in the background, and it's supposed to look a little bit scary. It's kind of eerie the way it gets all gray and dead looking now, and I think that'll help it blend into our scene. Lastly, add a levels adjustment layer above everything, and we're going to change the output levels to 20 and 150. What that does is it brought down the darks and brought down the lights. So basically it flattened the image a little bit. So the closer the lights and the darks come together, the flatter the image will be. So we basically brought down the lights quite a bit and the darks just a little bit so that those shadows aren't so harsh and the highlights are a lot less intense. If you turn that on and off, you can see the difference. And all this is just meant to help the tentacles blend into our scene that much better. All we have to do now is close this document and hit save when we're prompted. Make sure that you hit save and make sure that you close the document. Now it's going to save these changes and it applied them to all the tentacles in the scene. You can see how they're much more desaturated now. They have that blur and they're a little bit flatter with less contrast. So this is looking really good so far. Now I want to apply a filter to color all these action elements in the scene. So remember, we have all of our tentacles and ships in a folder called action. So just above that, I will add a color or photo filter, and this time I will choose the color option again and double click this color box and enter my value of 0079 AB, which gives me that same blue that I applied to the woman before. Once you clicked OK, change that density to about 97%, almost all the way there, and make sure preserve luminosity is checked. And now it's affecting everything in the scene. We only want it to affect the ships and tentacles, which are in the action folder. So we want to make sure this photo filter is just above action. It's just above that folder, and we'll create a clipping mask again, and that creates a clipping mask over that group, which only affects the elements inside the group. So now everything has this eerie blue dark color to it, and everything's coming together. It looks like it's all in the same environment. Above this photo filter that we just applied, we're going to create another adjustment layer for brightness and contrast. This time we'll choose a brightness of about -16 and a contrast of 17. And we will also create a clipping mask so it only affects the ships and tentacles, and that just gives them the proper contrast. As you can see, the water is very contrasted. We want these elements in the water to match. Okay, so now we will darken our ships because they're a little bit too bright for our scene. So just above your ship layer containing the ship closest to us, we are going to create a brightness and contrast adjustment layer. And we are going to change the brightness to about -30 and the contrast to about 45. And we will convert that to a clipping mask, so it's only affecting that ship, and it's just giving it further contrast and darkening it so it fits into the scene. We'll do the same thing with different values for the ship in the background. And this time I will change the values a little bit different. We'll make this one even darker, about -50. And the contrast, we can bump that up to about 20. And create a clipping mask. And you can see how we darken that ship in the background. Just above the ship and tentacle group 2, which is the one furthest in the background, I'm going to add a levels adjustment layer, and we want that to be just above this layer, and we will create a clipping mask. So it can't be in the other group, it needs to be just above this group, and create a clipping mask. If you can't create a clipping mask, that's because it was inside this group, so make sure it's outside of the group but not inside this group. It should stand alone on its own. And we will change the output levels to about 53, and I will leave this one at 255. So what that did, we brought down the blacks quite a bit, and it faded out these elements so that they kind of blend back into the scene. When things are further away from us, they tend to fade out a little bit depending on their environment. But fading them out will increase the illusion that they are in the background. Similar to the last step, we will now darken the ship and tentacle closest to us. So finding that group and adding adjustment layers just above it. We will add a levels adjustment as well. And first I'm going to make sure that that is a clipping mask over only that ship and tentacle. We want it to be up here, ship and tentacle 1. Create a clipping mask so it's on that group, and double click here to change the values. On the left arrow beneath the graph, I want to change that to a value of about 30 to 35, somewhere in there. And as you can see, that darkened everything on that layer. So I'll just turn that on and off, and now we have a lot of contrast going on here. And again, to darken the tentacle closest to us in the foreground here, we're going to perform the same technique. And close that, and we should be good. It's really dark because it's up here in the foreground where there's no light coming in. Now we will create a light source emitting from right in front of this woman, coming from this circle where there isn't any water, basically. And to do that, we're just going to create a couple new layers. So just below the woman in the wood is where we want to create these layers, but the woman in the wood layers, along with all of these adjustment layers, should be close to the top of your composition. So we're going to bring those above the action and the clipped adjustment layers here, just below photo filter 1 and levels. So just below photo filter 1 and level 2. Like this, you should have vignette, a levels adjustment layer, a photo filter, and then all of your photo filter and adjustments for the woman, and the wood should be below the woman. And just below the wood, we're going to add some new layers just below, and we're going to call this one Glow Big. And we'll duplicate that and call the second one Glow Small. Small. Okay. On the Glow Big layer, use a brush with 100% opacity and a soft edge. And we want the color to be white, and we want the size to be about the same size that covers the entire canvas. So you want the top and bottom of your brush to touch the top and bottom of the entire canvas. Click once directly in the center of the canvas, and you'll create this, big light effect. And we want to turn that down a little bit, so we're going to bring that down to about 50%. And we can play with that later if we need to change that value. Now we have some light coming into the scene. It spreads on top of the other ship, lightening it up, which is why we had to darken it before, so that once we do this, it matches the entire scene. We're going to repeat this step on the Glow Small layer, except we're going to bring our brush size down considerably to about a medium size, about half the size of the entire canvas, and we're just going to click once directly in the center, and this just adds a more concentrated light coming from that centerpiece. So now it looks like there's almost like a sun or some kind of really bright light coming from at the end of this tunnel. And you can turn these on and off and see how they affect the overall image. And because our photo filter is on top of that, it's controlling the light, and we're tinting it that warm color that's making it look like there could be a sun or some warm light source at the end of the tunnel. Next, we're going to create a glow effect around the woman that we would see as a result of a bright light source in front of her spilling over the edges as it comes up from behind her and hits the viewer. So to do that, we're going to have to create a couple new layers. We're going to create these layers just beneath the vignette. So at the very top, right under vignette, we're going to create a new layer, and we're going to call this one Bright Glow, and duplicate that and call this one Edge Glow. First, hold down the Command key and click on the woman layer here on the thumbnail. That will select the outline of the entire woman. And on the Bright Glow layer, with a white brush of about a medium size, just something like this, we're going to click off to the sides near the center of the canvas, off to the sides of the woman's waist, just a few times, with the edge of the brush spilling over onto her. And we will give the illusion of some of that light that is coming from behind her is actually spilling onto her as it hits the viewer or the camera. It creates this glow around the edges of the woman. Now we're going to do this to the entire edge. Click that edge glow layer with that selection still made. Make your brush considerably smaller and just begin to paint along the outside of the woman. So we don't want to overdo this effect, but we just want a little bit of a highlight around the entire edge. And the glow should be stronger closer to the center where the light source is, and a bit weaker near the outside. So just painting along the edge, giving somewhat of a glow all around the woman. Okay. So as you can see, that's looking pretty good. It's blending her into the scene much better. We will now add a filter to our woman layer to give her more of a surreal look. Everything in the scene looks very surreal and almost painting-like, and I want to apply a bit of a filter just to make her look a little bit less real, if that makes sense. I'll show you what I mean. Click on the woman layer and select filter. Go to filter gallery, and we're going to choose under the artistic tab here, choose paint dabs, and we're going to change the brush size to about 4 and the sharpness to about 12. Brush type is set to simple, and we're just going to hit OK. So you can see the effect right there. It kind of sharpens and thickens all the lines and shadows and whatnot, and gives it a little bit of a painting feeling. We'll hit OK, and you'll see how that's applied to our composition now. Now it looks pretty good. I don't really like the way it's applied to the top of her hair here. It's a bit too intense. So I'm just going to go into the smart filter with a black brush and and paint away some of that. Okay, so there we have filter, no filter, filter, no filter. So now that brought back some detail in her dress. Her hair, it looks a little bit, cartoony, like painted, but it's not pushed too far. When we stand back, it looks pretty good. It looks really realistic. It gives it a little bit more of a surreal feel. Now we're going to use a simple technique to add some shadows to our scene. We're going to use clipping masks and just a black brush with a blending mode of multiply. So to add shadows, click the layer that you wish to add shadows to and add a new layer above it. Right click this layer and convert it to a clipping mask so it only affects the layer below. And we're going to change this blending mode to multiply since we're working with shadows. Now I just want to paint in my shadows, so I'm just going to start painting down here with a black brush, adding shadows wherever I see fit. So I'm just giving her some darkness right under her dress, and now I'm going to expand this brush and darken the overall wood altogether. I might even create a new layer just to do that and create a clipping mask once again and make this brush really big, and we'll turn that down just a bit so it's not so aggressive. And now we have the shadow and the darkened wood, which blends into the scene a lot better. I'll name these layers darkened wood and dress shadow. I'm also going to apply this to the woman, so I'm going to add a new layer just above the woman. It's a clipping mask now because of all these above it. Just make sure it's a clipping mask. And I'm going to darken her head with this, so darken head is what I'll call that layer. And just zooming in, and I'm just going to darken that a little bit because there's too much light spilling onto her head where there's no light source up there. So there you go, that looks a little bit better. And now I'm going to apply the same technique to all the tentacles in the water. So just finding those elements in my layers panel. Here's tentacle 1. I will create a new layer above it, above the group called tentacle 1. Convert it to oops, it's outside that group, so it needs to be just above the group, but outside of the group above it. And now I can create a clipping mask and call it shadow 1 for tentacle 1. And we're just going to add some shadow to this. Considering that the light source is coming from in front, there will be a lot of shadow on this tentacle. It wouldn't be very bright along this edge. So there you go. And I'll turn that brightness down just a bit so we get some more of that texture back, but not too much. Maybe about 80%. And let's do the same thing to the tentacle over here. Tentacle 3. Create a new layer above it. Create a clipping mask. Name it shadow tentacle 3. And begin painting. And always consider that light source. Try to match things accordingly. I'll turn that brightness down just a bit. And we'll do the same thing to the last tentacle over here in the distance. Tentacle 2. And create a new layer. Create the clipping mask. Name it shadow tentacle 2. And just darken the overall tentacle. There you go. I'll turn down the brightness a bit. There, perfect. So now all the light sources are similar. This one could even lose a little bit of the brightness around the edge there, so I'll go ahead and paint that away. Just a little bit too much light coming over that edge. That looks a lot better. Okay, so now we have our light source consistent on all tentacles. The shadow behind the girl, the darkness on her head. We can add some more darkness to this tentacle because it's so close and there's no light coming from over here. So we'll find that foreground tentacle, create a new layer, it's a clipping mask, and call it shadow foreground tentacle. And just get a large black brush and zoom out a bit. Just paint in there. And we'll turn that opacity down just a bit to bring some of that detail back in. And now we have a realistic light source. I think I want to make a little bit of a change to the filter applied to the woman. It's a bit too intense right now. So we're just going to tone that down. I'm going to close this action filter. Just going to change that brush size. It's a little bit too big. Bring it down to 3. Okay. And that looks okay. These lines are a bit too sharp though, so I'm just going to open the filter again and bring it down to about 7 or something like that. And that looks a lot better. It's a lot less aggressive, and it fits into the scene well. I like the little highlights on her hair, and I think I need to make a little adjustment here There's some hair missing there, and maybe these sections could be darkened. So I'm going to double click the woman adjustment, or the woman smart object. So now we can actually make those adjustments in here. And the first thing I'm going to do is clone in some hair into the space that we left. By double clicking this smart object again, we'll get to the original cutout version of the woman. And this is where we're going to make our adjustments, and they'll be applied to our main composition. So we can find that we have the fixed dress and the girl cut out original that we made. We'll make a new layer here and call this clone. And I will just use the clone stamp and find a similar section of hair, something from this area right here. And we're going to add that in to fill in that gap. And I just want to tone down these really bright areas because they're overexposed in our main comp. And I'll do a similar approach, just cloning from a darker area and letting it spill onto that. So let me darken that, and that's looking pretty good. Let's see how that looks. We're just going to close this smart object, save it, close this one as well, save it, and you can see our changes have been applied. That hair has been filled in, and the light that I got rid of there is a lot less intense. And that looks pretty good. All I want to do now as a final step is add a tint to the entire scene with a bluish green hue. To do this, just click on the vignette and add a hue saturation adjustment layer. This will be applied above everything else. And I want to change the tone of the blues in this image. So I'm going to just grab this blue menu item from the drop-down menu here. And I will change the hue to about -10, making it a little bit more green, and then bumping up the saturation a bit to about 10. And that just changes the tone of our image to a little bit of a green color. Kind of looks more like realistic water. It's less blue, more green, and that fades nicely into that dark tone on the edge. And there you go. That's pretty much it, guys. We created this entire scene with a few steps and some lighting techniques. But other than that, that's all we got for today. So great job, guys. Thanks for watching, and I will talk to you soon.